I require adult supervision doing the advance. So, back by popular demand, the man, the myth, the legend, Brandon Waltens, the senior editor of Texas Scorecard, here on this Monday, November 3rd edition of the Advance. Brandon, you're looking great today.
Oh yeah,
Nice
tanned, rested, ready.
Tanned, rested, ready. All right.
I couldn't get back here quick enough, Michael.
Well, we're glad to have you back. The entire team missed you.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So it's great to have you back. All right. Fun fact of the day.
Okay.
Learned something today. On November 4th, 1845 was the first National Uniform Election Day. That up until then, elections like your fall elections, mainly for president, but for Congress was all over the map when states would have their elections for members of Congress, and like into the spring and stuff. But Congress decided in 1845 they were going to set presidential elections on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, following a pattern of a couple of states, including New York, where they had done that. But 1845, of course, is not a presidential election, but a number of states said, we're going to take advantage of that to kind of compress the elections. So begin up until 1845, presidential elections were held in a 34-day, like a month-long period. You'd have states doing them as early as the end of October up through into December during the election. So
that's a fun fact.
Yeah, kind of a fun fact. And so so that you now had in 1845, the first time a lot of states all had elections on uniform election. And that, of course, is November 4th is tomorrow, is that anniversary. And what a surprise, we have a general election tomorrow.
Yes.
In Texas. Some people, but the biggest thing on the ballot statewide are these propositions, these proposed amendments to the state constitution.
Yeah, this is typically a pretty low turnout election. I mean, if you look historically, because this isn't the presidential race isn't on the ballot, and it's not even really the midterms, right, which will happen next year. This is like the midterms. Primarily, everybody across the state is going to have at least the constitutional amendments, which are 17 proposed amendments to the state's constitution that range from things like property tax relief. There's some spending items on there for different programs. There's a number of different items on there. We've certainly talked about those at length before. But one of the things that on the ballot right now that's getting a lot of attention has been this push for stronger bail reform. What I mean by that, this is something that has been a priority of conservatives, and Governor Greg Abbott made it a priority this last legislative session, saying that, look, we've had a lot of violent offenders out there being put out on bail, where in many cases they've gone out and committed crimes again while out on bail. This proposed constitutional amendment would allow, Proposition 3 would allow judges to deny bail to certain offenders, so certain violent offenders and human trafficking. There's a number of different items that fall under that category.
People previously convicted of crimes. You're not talking about, Susie gets a speeding ticket and suddenly gets thrown in jail for 20 years.
It's very specific. And the judges have discretion, right?
Right.
The judges have discretion, so it's not an automatic denial of bail by any means, but it puts that tool in the toolbox. Interesting looking, if you look back at the session, this is what's on the ballot now. And certainly you see the Republican Party of Texas coming out there saying, support this, we go out and vote for this. Democrat Party largely surprised, saying no. You look at the local voter guides by Democrat groups, Democrats largely opposed to this. It's also interesting because these constitutional amendments don't just appear on the ballot out of nowhere.
Right.
They all get at least 2/3 vote in the Texas House and the Texas Senate before they end up on the ballot. And there were actually a number of, I was looking back today, there were a number of bail reform measures that would have gone even further, I would say, than what's ultimately on the ballot here, that ultimately didn't make it because they didn't receive enough Democrat support. You need at least a marginal amount of Democrats to support it to get that 2/3 number. But that's something we've got a story up today on that. But this is just one of 17 amendments. And folks that don't vote in these elections typically, I think, would be well served to go out and research, look at these amendments before they show up, and to go vote in this, because this is about one of the most direct forms, I guess, of democracy that we have in Texas is actually voting on these constitutional amendments.
Well, this is the thing that I think a lot of folks who aren't from Texas and move here as adults, they're often shocked. I get these emails all the time, get these phone calls, direct messages on Twitter, on X and Facebook and all these places. People turn to, why are we voting on this? Why am I voting on the establishment of a fund or a property tax exemption? Why am I having to vote on this? And the reason why you're voting on this is because the framers of our current state constitution, 1876, they were very distrustful of centralized power. And they were coming out of Reconstruction. They didn't like the heavy hand of Washington, D.C. They didn't like the heavy hand of Washington, D.C. picking governors. They didn't like the heavy hand of Washington, D.C. picking governors who then controlled the state. And so that's why you have in Texas a strong lieutenant governor. That's why you have why you don't have initiative and referendum, because they were worried about that kind of game being funded by out-of-staters. So all these things go through this very convoluted process to make what are in other states kind of statutory changes to the operations of state government. In Texas, it requires the consent of the people. And that's why, Brendan, it's often disappointing for me when I see how few of us participate in the election. The framers of our state constitution actually believed this was what we as Texans could use to protect ourselves from overburdensome government. And instead, too few people participate. And that's where you find some of the things on the ballots where it's creating multi-billion-dollar funds and other things that in some ways goes kind of contra to what our founders envisioned for this process. Now, our founding fathers wanted the citizens to be speaking on these things. I would suggest that maybe we need more citizens participating in these elections to make sure that we really are okay with the spending and the exemptions and the changes. That's our job as citizens.
Yeah. So you've got these 17 proposed constitutional amendments. Every Texan, everybody watching that's a voter in Texas, I should say, is going to have these amendments. Now, you could potentially have more on your ballot this time. Depending on where you live, some local elections are happening. So some city council races, it just depends if they have their November elections in November, then you're going to have some of those potential city council races and local elections. And then you have in a number of particularly school districts we've seen that have put out what are called VATers, voter approval tax rate elections, which is essentially, the legislature came in several years ago and said, you cannot, as a local taxing entity, you cannot raise taxes year to year by more than a certain percent. And off the top of my head, I think it's what, 3.5%, 2.5%. You can't raise it more than that unless you get voter approval. And what we've seen is that a number of school districts are going to the voters saying, we want to raise taxes even further. And we'll see whether or not those pass. A number of them did fail last time. The question is, if we have lower turnout now, does that affect it? Do they actually have a better chance with lower turnout?
And look, it's very important. This will sound silly for me to say, and forgive me for saying this, but just because you don't participate in your school district's Vader election, you still pay the higher tax.
Yeah.
If you don't participate, you're still going to pay the higher tax. So by not participating, if your school district is doing either a debt increase or a Vader election, by not participating, you're voting for it. So if you're okay with higher property taxes, if you're okay with higher property tax rate, if you're okay with 20 plus years of higher property tax burdens through debt, just don't vote. If you don't vote, you're saying yes.
Yes. One of the biggest, though, that has gotten a lot of attention, and I've been surprised, frankly, to see some of the reaction to it from locals, has been what's being proposed in the capital city, in the city of Austin.
Yeah,
we have this Proposition Q that would amount to this massive tax increase, I think 20% upwards on Austin taxpayers, who, by the way, are not exactly paying, the bottom rate of taxes as it is. And it's been really interesting, Michael. Obviously, the city of Austin's a liberal city. It's Democrat city council, a lot of Democrat voters there, Democrat strongholds certainly. And yet, you've seen some interesting opposition to this. Obviously, Republicans, the local Republican Party there in Travis County, has been opposed to this tax increase. But you've also seen some interesting other opposition as well. You've seen some Democrats out there, even the Austin American Statesman, which I don't think has met a tax increase or liberal policy that they didn't like, is saying, well, maybe this goes too far. And so you potentially could see this fail, which I think is an interesting tell for maybe where Democrats think they are heading into the next election in 2026.
Okay, so we've got these local school board races in some places.
Mm-hmm.
You've got tax hikes or debt offerings statewide. We have the constitutional amendments, but in a couple of areas, we have special elections for unexpired terms. Most notably, Senate District 9. That's, I think, Tarrant County.
Yes.
A seat that was held by Kelly Hancock, state senator, who was appointed to be the acting comptroller after Glenn Hager stepped out of that office. So there's now a race to fill that seat. But it's important to note, this is an election that gets us, that fills the unexpired term. It is possible that a person could be elected in the special election, but never actually serve a single millisecond in a legislative session. Explain that.
Yes. So, we actually saw, this isn't just hypothetical. We actually saw this very recently, when there was a special election for a Texas House seat in Northeast Texas, where ultimately State Representative Brent Money, who's a freshman this session, went out on that. But there was a special election, there were runoffs, all of that, to where you actually had another person, Jill Dutton, then actually holding the seat for several months during a time where the legislature didn't meet. And so the question is there a possibility that a candidate could win tomorrow and fill out the remainder of that unexpired term, so going into next year where the legislature is not scheduled to be in session, barring any potential special sessions that the governor might call them back for. But then maybe another candidate wins the Republican primary in March and ultimately wins in November, and then actually starts out the session in 2027 with a different member. Very, very possible. It's been an interesting race to watch. You actually have three candidates in that race. You have a Democrat candidate in there. It's a Republican seat. Democrat not likely to win. But then you have
the Democrat unlikely to win in a general election, in a normal election, with kind of all the people turning out, either gubernatorial at the top of the seat or ticket, or the Senate or the president, drawing in lots of people. A Democrat is not going to win Senate District 9 in a normal circumstance.
Right. And this is not a normal circumstance, though, right? So you've got your Democrat candidate, then you have your two Republican candidates who are both also talking about running in the March primary as well, but are both on the ballot. Those are former Southlake Mayor John Huffman, and then conservative activist Lee Wamsgans, who's someone who's been very active in North Texas for quite some time.
Many folks not from Metroplex will know of her because of Patriot Mobile.
Yes, that is certainly something a lot of people would know her from. This race has been interesting to watch, Michael, because while you've had the Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick come in and support Lee Wamsgans, President Donald Trump has issued his endorsement, has endorsed her, and you've seen a lot of those people throwing their support behind Lee in this race. The financial campaign finance dealings show that this is actually becoming a bit of a proxy fight now for casino interests. Some, you have the Las Vegas Sands casino, magnate, where you've got, they've got $9 million, I think, heading into this next cycle. Well, they've already spent millions on this race. Now, it's just one state Senate seat, right? But it's important because right now, I think we've talked about this before, that casinos, the last time they had a vote was not this last session, but the session prior, where you had a vote on legalizing expanded casino gambling in Texas. And
which is essentially granting monopolies for anyone. A casino gets a monopoly for geographic areas. So you're not really voting to legalize casinos.
No,
Michael and Brandon
we
couldn't
cannot start a casino in this.
Couldn't open up the back end of our studio as a casino. Is very, very careful. It's these government monopolies.
Exactly. They lost ground during the last election,
Mhm.
and the issue did not move. Certainly, the lieutenant governor has been somebody who has said that he is opposed to it and thinks the Senate will be opposed to it. And so what you have here is you have the casino interest spending a lot of money, being the primary donor to Huffman's campaign,
Right.
and essentially setting up this fight against the lieutenant governor, and I would say the Republican Party at large, because the Republican Party, again, is opposed to this sort of
Right.
casino expansion in the party platform. And this is just one state Senate seat, but it could be a bellwether for what we can expect to see during the primary elections in several months,
Right.
when Las Vegas Sands and some of these casino interests could continue to dump a lot of money into some of these races.
Some of the polling I've seen shows that the Democrat there, tomorrow is really a race to see who's going to be in a runoff. The Democrat polls enough support, then with the two Republicans kind of splitting the vote. It's very possible. You're going to have Huffman or Ramgas in the runoff with the Democrat. Interestingly, last week an event, Huffman said that if he didn't make the runoff, he was just kind of done, right? Ramgas, though, made it very clear she's not running to be a seat warmer. She's running to serve in the 2027 session of the Texas legislature, kind of indicating that she was going to be running in March, and that everyone better be ready for her to be continuing her campaign on through. So the voters there are going to have to weigh all those kind of things, potentially should be weighing all those things as they're looking at what kind of fighter they want representing them in the Texas Senate.
Yeah, and this could be a race that plays out multiple times, like we saw with that race with Brent Money a couple years ago. This could be one where we've got an election, we've got a result on Tuesday night, but there could be more rounds of voting to come with runoffs and the primary and potentially primary runoffs and all of that, not even to say next November. So first round of voting is on Tuesday, but that race, I think no matter what happens, is far from over. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be following, of course, these election results tomorrow night at texasscorecard.com. You can see how the results of those constitutional amendments, as well as some of these special elections as well. For right now, I'm Brandon Waltens with Michael Quinn Sullivan here, saying thank you for joining us.